having come here like the speedways in America because of the traffic. Baruch Hashem, we made it on time. So in this year, what I want to do is go through basic Jewish texts which some of you are already familiar with. And I want to do it from two different points of view. One is I want there to be an intellectual understanding of what the text says, what it means, what it implies. But I also want it to be clear how it's integrated, what you do with the text. Let me illustrate what I'm talking about. Let's take, for example, stories. Judaism has a great literature of stories. There are about 1,000 pages of the Hebrew Bible. There are hundreds of stories there. Obviously, stories are very important. Contrary to some popular belief, Hasidim did not invent the interest in stories. Now, a story does something that other texts do not. A story invites you to identify. A story invites you to experience vicariously certain events that take place. When you read laws, it's very hard to maintain that attitude. Laws are simply things that you have to do. But a story invites you to become part of the events. Well, there's a very important impact that has, because as opposed to just reading the information and memorizing it, knowing what it says, you're personally affected. Writers in general can communicate things about the world that encyclopedias can't. For example, what does it feel like to be an addict? If a writer writes a biography of an addict, the reader, because he experiences vicariously what the story is about, he feels the pains, he feels the frustration, he feels the successes and failures. That communicates something which an encyclopedia article will not. How does it feel? What is it like to live like that? And that can have a big effect on your attitudes. Gee, I never knew what kind of struggle it was. I never knew how much they suffer. And then your attitude towards them changes. These are people who need sympathy and they need support. And sometimes they'll do things which are destructive. Sometimes they'll do things which for other people would be inexcusable. And here you have to relate to them in a different way. So it affects your values, it affects your outlook on the world, it affects how you live. The Torah is meant to do that as well. When you read Torah, to a certain extent, it's a voyage of self-discovery. You read a story and you react to it. Very often, what happens is this: you read a story and react to it, and then you question your reaction and you think, well, if I'm reacting to it in this way, for example, you have a great person who's described in the text as a tzaddik, and he does something and it looks terrible. You think, why would he do that? How am I supposed to understand that he did that? The next natural question to ask is, did he really do that? That I see in the words in the text? Maybe I'm not reading it right. Maybe it means something else. So you take your puzzlement about the text and reflect it back on yourself, and you say, am I getting it? Am I not getting it? If you realize later that you weren't getting it, so then your attitude towards everything changes. In particular, your attitude towards your own abilities changes, as it should. When you're getting into a very deep subject and you're just beginning, you have no way to measure the depth of the subject. That's one of the reasons that we read these texts with commentaries, because these people who wrote commentaries knew the totality of this text and many other texts, and they were geniuses, and they were deeply feeling people, and they can give you an appreciation for how you're supposed to integrate it. So I want to try to read these texts on these two different levels, because in the end, all of the Torah is called teaching. And teaching is supposed to give you an idea how to live. I'll illustrate this with a famous Rashi, the very first Rashi in Chumash. The Torah starts with the words, Bereshis bara Elokim es hashmayim v'ha'aretz, which can be translated, as Oneness does, In the beginning, God created heavens and earth. And Rashi, quoting some Rav Moshe, which may have been his father or someone else, asked the following question. The Torah is a book of teaching. It's supposed to teach me how to live. The direct teachings are the teaching of mitzvos. Why doesn't the Torah begin with the first mitzvah? First mitzvah that's recorded in the Torah is Rosh Chodesh. Nisan is the first month of the year, and you're responsible for keeping tabs on the beginnings of the months. That's in the book of Exodus. Why doesn't it start there? So, Rashi answers, there will come a time when non-Jews will challenge you, and they'll say, you're living in the land of Israel? I mean, this isn't fantasy, as you'll see instantly. How did you get here? You conquered it from the indigenous inhabitants? That's just theft. You just stole it. You don't belong here. You have no right to be here. You've probably heard people talk like that. Of course, it's insane. If you do go back in history, everything that is owned by one nation today was taken from some other nation another time. But okay, that's what they say. So Rashi says, how should you answer them? You should tell them the world is not ever, it has not been existing forever. It has a creator, and the creator has the authority to assign a piece of land to whomever he pleases. He gave it to the previous inhabitants, and then he told us they don't deserve it anymore. I want you to take it. I want it to be yours. That's how you should answer them. Okay, so now let's go back and ask, how does this solve the original problem? The problem was Torah is not starting in the right place. It's a book of teaching you how to live, and the first mitzvah is many pages later, and it starts with history. Now, there are two ways to answer this question. This you'll learn when you learn Talmud carefully. You'll see that a question like this, when you have a contradiction like that, there are two ways to answer it. One way is to say, you're right. Thinking of the book as a book of teaching and instruction, it should have started there. But, surprise, surprise, there are other things in the book besides teaching and instruction, and they're important also. That's one way to analyze it. The other way to analyze it is, you're making a mistake. You think the book begins with only history? You're making a mistake. The first words of the book are also teaching. They're also teaching. They're also giving you a mitzvah. So there isn't any contradiction why it starts here. It starts here because it's a book of teaching, and it is teaching you. I struggled with this for about 50 years. And this year, it occurred to me, I think maybe a latter way of understanding it is better. Really, the first verse is teaching you something to do. That's what Rashi explains. When non-Jews come and attack you and say you have no right to the land, you have something to say. Now, that means that having something to say to people who attack you is a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah that you should be in a position to do. What influenced me to think of it this way? Because I was reading the Maharal, and in Pirkei Avos, he talks about Dam asher toshiv la'apikoros, know what to answer a heretic, and he says that's a very important mitzvah. And it's in a context which promises you a great position in the world to come. And he says, you should study what the heretics say in their own words, so you should know how to answer them in their own words. And he says, don't think that you're wasting time not studying Torah, and that you should only study Torah. No, this is a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to know what to answer. So taking that Maharal and using it with the Rashi, Rashi's saying, the first words in the Torah are a mitzvah. And when you said that the Torah is a book of instruction, how to live, book of instructions from the Creator, what you should do with your life, he's right. We're not going back on that. But the first is a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah of knowing what to answer. Now, that explains why there's no contradiction, but the question will be, why would you start the book with this mitzvah? Why do you put it at the beginning as opposed to many, many other mitzvahs? I don't have a full answer to that question. But there is an element here which is brought in various forms. When you talk about knowing what to answer the Apikoros, the heretic, where are the heretics? Where are they found? When are you likely to have this confrontation? Well, maybe they're in the Democratic Party, and maybe I didn't say that. I didn't do that. I didn't scratch that from the rolls like they do. When they edit the president's remarks. But then there's one which for sure you're going to meet, and that's the heretic inside. Everybody has in him, because people are complex, and many different strands of their histories running in them simultaneously, and many different influences from the outside, especially someone who newly makes a commitment to traditional Jewish living, has family and has friends, and often they are raising objections. There's the heretic inside, and there, for your own spiritual stability, for your own spiritual development, you need to know what to answer the heretic inside also. So that could be a reason why it comes first, because if you don't undertake this critical attitude, you'll learn and you'll do and you'll follow, but part of you won't be on board. Part of you will be saying, yeah, but there's no reason for this, or yeah, but this doesn't make sense. And you have to know how to answer that. And it's very interesting what answer Rashi gives. There are many ways to answer someone who says you stole it. One is the one I indicated about 6 minutes ago. You say back to the person, and where are you living? Manchester, England? Yeah, well, 2,000 years ago, other people were there. And they weren't even your ethnic group. And you took it from them. Everybody's taken land from everybody else. You talk about returning land to the Native Americans. But they stole it! Every place they are, they stole. Should they return it to them? And then go back 6 generations, 10 generations? But the original people don't exist anymore. Just go back as far as they exist? That's an answer. Rashi doesn't give that answer. And the reason, I think, is because there are 2 different kinds of answers. There are 2 different ways to approach a person in answering his question. One is to examine his question, the way he asks it, and to see whether it's logically well-formed, thought out, whether the reasons are cogent reasons, and if not, show him that he has failed to ask a valid question. That's one genuine way to respond to a question, to show that the question isn't valid. If you do that, what you accomplish is you show him that you understand him. You show him that you understand his position better than he understands it, because you know that it's incompetent and he doesn't. He has to grudgingly give credit to your intellect and to your knowledge, and you reduce his self-confidence. Wow, I thought I had those frumies that I can't. Boy, lock him up. And all of a sudden, his keys evaporate. All of that is accomplished. One thing isn't accomplished. You didn't teach him any Torah. Didn't teach him anything about the truth, how one should look at the world. All you taught him is that his way of looking at the world is incompetent, which is important. I think it's important. So Rashi doesn't do that. Rashi says, listen, you're starting from a wrong premise altogether. Either the world has no guide, the world has no creator, or the world's creator isn't interested in running the world. Ozav Hashem, or the deists who say there's a great creator who created the world and went on vacation. They don't need to do with it. No. There's a hands-on creator who's running what happens in the world. And he, being the creator, has the authority to do with it as he sees fit. And this is what he's doing with it. Now, the person you're talking to is getting now an insight into our thought system, into what the Torah says. And by the way, those of you who have heard that you don't teach Torah to non-Jews, that's only a half-truth. A great deal of Torah you do teach to non-Jews because they have mitzvos that they have to do. And a great deal of Torah is background for doing those mitzvos. They don't believe in a creator. They can't do any mitzvos. No such thing as a commandment without a commander. So to teach them about the existence of the Creator and how He runs the world is definitely a mitzvah to teach a non-Jew. So you're sharing your world with him, and implicitly there's a challenge. You're starting from your premises, and I'm starting from my premises. And the first thing you accomplish by telling him what Rashi says you should tell him, is that you see that I have a premise that I'm starting from, and from my premise what I'm saying makes sense. The Creator does have the authority to assign his creation the way He pleases. So you have no complaint against my system. My system is consistent and is organized in a logical way. You just don't believe in the whole system. Okay, now ask yourself, can you show that my system is wrong? Can you give good reason to think that your system is better than my system? That there's no Creator, that there's no organization to history, that there's no guidance, and so forth and so on? Let's hear it. The implicit challenge is, you've only made an assumption. Even if I've made an assumption, I make an assumption, and from my assumption what I'm doing is reasonable. You made an opposite assumption, isn't reasonable, but to criticize me, you've got to show that your assumption is better than mine. I don't think you can do that. And that, again, diffuses the attack. Most he can say is, well, he has his system, but I have my system. That's much different from accusing us of being robbers. So when you analyze that first Rashi this way, it's a tremendous lesson of some of the things that you do when you live the Torah, when you live a life, a Jewish life, how you have to regard your own psychology and how you interact with others. I will tell you that I don't know that Rashi is indicating there that this is the better way or the only way to answer. I told you there are two different types of answers. My technique, because of my personality, is I start with the attack on the competence of the question, and then I teach the Torah. Other people do it in the opposite order. Some people do only one altogether. I think that there's room for different strategies, in particular for different audiences, for different people. But that's what Rashi's doing. So is it clear now what Rashi's doing? And clear now what it says for us? This, I think, is an example of what I'm trying to accomplish. Take a text, first of all, analyze what it means, and then to see what impact it has on how we should live. We together so far? Okay, so now if you can take blue books, each of you. As I said on the WhatsApp chat, I'm going to start with the Shema, and we'll go through it very slowly, I would say almost microscopically. And I will tell you that I have no fixed agenda per day. If a question or association occurs to you and you want to explore it, that's fine. And it doesn't have to be on topic specifically. If it's meaningful to you and you hear it in what's going on, and we can discuss it. I'm not in a hurry. And I intend to do this by discussion together. We could have done this in a sitter. Yes, let's see this. Yeah, it's on page 972. Put my glasses. And one of the things that we have to investigate in each passage is how to translate the words. The I scroll is one way of translating, but there are other ways of translating, and maybe different ways of translating will answer different questions. It says at the bottom of the page. They translate, hear, O Israel, Hashem is our God, Hashem is one and only. That's probably a little unusual as a translation for you. Usually, it's translated as Hashem is one. Let's start with it that way, and we'll move to the one and only. Hear, O Israel, Hashem is our God, Hashem is one. Any questions arise to you out of those few words? In Hebrew, it's 6 words altogether. Yeah.
Who is Israel that we're talking about? Is it like Jacob?
So, yeah, it's an interesting question. Who is Israel? Okay, what else?
Who is talking?
Yeah. Now, having asked who is being talked to, who's doing the talking? Somebody's saying to somebody else, somebody's saying to Israel, hear, O Israel. So that's one thing to investigate. Very good. Very good. What else? Yeah? Oh, I thought you were raising here. What about how it starts?
Hashem is our God.
Sorry?
Hashem is our God.
Even before that.
Hear.
Why is hearing so important? Hear? You could use it, but even more often, if you want to impress somebody with a fact, what do you usually say? First of all, you could ask them to listen. Right. Now, the question is whether, and in Hebrew, hear and listen aren't the same verb. To listen is lahazin, like ha'azinu, parshas ha'azinu, and shema is to hear. So that's an interesting distinction. But also, somebody tells you something, you want to indicate that you understand him. What do you say? I see what you mean, right? You could say, I hear you. That's more colloquial. But you also could say, I see what you mean. Why is hearing so important here? And indeed, the Torah often says, see that such and such is true. See, I have set before you this day good and life and evil and death. So why the Torah here chose to use the word hear rather than to see? Okay, would it be possible to erase a word in the sentence and still preserve its meaning? Yeah, why is the word Hashem repeated? Suppose it said, hear, O Israel, Hashem, our God, is one. Now here you'll say, well, what about the is? But there is no is in Hebrew. That's an artifact of the English. The Hebrew could be translated, hear, O Israel, Hashem, our God, is one. But it repeats the name of Hashem. So that's also a problem. So you see, very few words, if you take them seriously, you could raise all sorts of questions about it. These are textual problems, and they're problems in simple understanding of the verse. There's also a philosophical problem here. Suppose I said to you that Elon Musk is one. Taj Mahal is one. Argentina is one. what would you hear in what I'm saying? Would you have any objection to my saying those things? Elon Musk is one. Really? What did you think? He was a committee? Argentina is one. Yeah, it's one country, right? Of course. When you use a proper name's job is to name one thing. Beethoven's Fifth Symphony is one. One rather than what? 3 symphonies? Of course it's one. It's a thing. It's a thing, so of course it's one. What could you possibly communicate by using a proper name and saying one? This is what's pushing the art scroll to change the ending. Say Hashem is one, appropriate response is, tell me something I didn't know. Hashem is a proper name. It's the name of one thing, of course. So, to translate it as the one and only means not only the number is one, but what Hashem is unique. Nothing else is like him. Of course, they don't tell you the one and only what, but okay. They want you to hear it that way. And there are commentators who say it that way, that the idea of uniqueness. But without uniqueness, it's hard to know what it's saying altogether. So all these questions have to be taken apart. So let's start. Let's start with Hashem is one and look at the literature that explains that sentence. There is a philosophical literature and there is a Kabbalistic literature. Taking the Rambam and the Ramchal as the examples of each. I'm not going to do this in great detail, but I'll just give you a sense of what's going on, and then I'm going to suggest perhaps a third way to look at it. The Rambam says, when you say that Hashem is one, you have to understand this applies to every dimension, every application, every context, every environment, every activity is always one. Never more than one, which is a little bit better, a little more precise. Never more than one. Never can a number bigger than one be applied to the Creator. In the Guide to Perplexity, even one can't be applied. Okay, well, I'll leave that aside. Just letting you know, we know that, we're aware of that. But let's just think about this. No number other than one. So the Rambam goes on to explain. Well, that would already immediately eliminate the idea that God has parts. Because if he had parts, then there'd be another number that applied to him, the number of his parts. Well, if he doesn't have any parts, then right away you'll know he's not physical. Because physical things have parts, most of them, almost all of them. Even protons have parts, right? Neutrons have parts called quarks. And if you'll say, but according to the current picture of the world, there are things that don't have parts like electrons and photons. They're not supposed to have any parts. But the Rambam says they are a combination of matter and form. They have a certain matter which is their material that they carry. And then there's their form, which means the qualities that they have. So every physical thing is a combination of two features, matter and form. So when you tell me that Hashem has no number other than one, you've already excluded the physicality of the Creator. That's not trivial. That's not trivial. That taught you something which, it's very interesting. The Rambam, in his day, there were faithful Jews, reasonably educated, definitely fulfilling the mitzvahs as best they could, who believed that God is physical. He writes about that. And indeed, the Mitzvah Rebbe, I had a little context, I was once at a Shabbos table with him. There were only a few people there. It was in Chicago. There was a snowstorm. And he said to the group, what do you think the Rambam's greatest achievement was? Wow. I can't even, see the question from 1,000 miles away. Nobody had anything to offer. And he said, I think that his greatest achievement was in discussing the basic principles of faith, the 13 principles of faith. Okay, it's true he was the first one to set up principles and give them a number and give them a status. And he said one indication of how much he accomplished is that in his time, there were Jews who believed that the Creator is physical. He writes about it. He even writes about the penalty for that. Today, you won't find a Jew on the face of the earth who holds that. Whether Ashkenazi or Sephardi, Yeshivish, Hasidish, Hungarian, Los Angeles, you won't find a Jew anywhere. He wiped it out. He wiped that out of the Jewish people. That's a very interesting accomplishment. So here he traces it back to the idea of the unity of the Kodesh Baruch. He then pushes it in the first section of the guide to say that strictly speaking, you can't speak about Hashem's attributes. Because if you start talking about his attributes, you'll find out there's more than one. He's just, he's merciful, he's kind, he's consistent, he's caring, and a lot of qualities that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has. So if you think of him as actually having qualities, you're going to be stuck with a larger number. And that can't be. So he has no qualities. Now that's challenging and goes on to be discussed. You talk about what he does and not what he is. Part 1, chapter 54. But what the Rambam is telling you is that if you understand what oneness means, meaning one in every possible respect, it has a lot of depth. It has a lot of meaning. And here I don't have to use the Art Scroll translation. Simply, the oneness itself carries a lot of information. That's an introduction to the philosophical side. Ramchal in Das Tunis says oneness, and he doesn't mean only this, but he says oneness implies that there is only one power that makes things happen in the world. All of the power that makes things happen in the world comes from one source. This is his project called Gilui Yichud, for those who know. And he says there are two natural obstacles to appreciating this. Two ways of looking at the world which make this not obvious at all. One is this. Let's look at the natural world and understand how it works and see whether it naturally shows itself as one or doesn't. And let's look at simple, basic aspects of the world. Take the sun. The sun shines, and the days of the year are always the same, and the movement of the sun in the sky, the daily movement and the yearly movement is always the same. It's regular, and it's perfect, and it provides light and heat. It makes life possible. That's one thing. Now take the wind. The wind is irregular, very difficult to predict, doesn't form any obvious patterns. Why would you think that the force behind the shining of the sun is the same as the force that's behind the blowing of the wind? Would you naturally think that? Would you naturally associate them? Now take grass. If you live in certain climates, grass grows in the spring, and it lives all summer, and then it dies in the fall, and it's barren in the winter. Is that like the sun shining? Is that like the wind? Not at all. It's a yearly cycle, growth and death. Can you imagine someone saying, oh yeah, look at that. You got the sun and the wind and the grass. Sure, it all must be the work of the same artist. All must be work of the same agent. I don't think you would say that at all. the features of the world don't fit together into a uniform pattern where you would naturally associate it with one human being or one agent. The fact that God is one, says the Ramchal, means there's one power behind all of it. And by the way, some historians say that the motivation for the unification of science came originally from scientists who believed in a creator. Because you don't believe in a creator, polytheism is the natural answer. There are forces of the wind and forces of the sun and forces of the sea, and because they're so different from one another. So the force behind each one is going to be a different force. It's a much more natural picture. So the Ramchal says when you say the Shema, one of the things you have in mind is, look at this variegated universe that we live in and organize it under one thought. Now, you can't do that in detail, neither at the moment can the scientists, because they haven't found the TOE. You know what the TOE is? Theory of everything. The GUT, Grand Unified Theory, golly, Grand Unified Theory, left out gravity, thank you. Gravity is pretty important. So they give it a wonderful name, but it didn't do the job. So they're looking for the TOE. Is there one? Will we find one? Nobody knows. Worth looking, because if you don't look, you won't find. But on the other hand, you may never find. But they know what they're looking for. They're looking for one conception, which then accounts for everything else. We too have to understand that Kodesh Baruch Hu accounts for everything else, even though we can't see it in detail. That's one of the things you do in your mind when you say the Shema. And Ramchal says the same thing is true of history. We know that Kodesh Baruch Hu created the world for a purpose, to get somewhere, to accomplish something. When you look at history and you look at the purpose, there isn't an obvious connect. A lot of the things that happen in history seem to be random. Some of them seem to be negative, pushing us further away from the goal that Kodesh Baruch Hu set for the world. We don't see in detail how each thing that happens leads to that purpose. Nevertheless, only one force is responsible for the things that happen in the world, and that being the case, that we have to intellectually unify history as a process leading to the goal, even though we can't see how it works in the details. That's the challenge, according to the Ramchal, when you say the Shema, that Hashem is one, to see that there's only one power that makes the universe run. That's also important content, even without the ArtScrolls translation. I'm not criticizing the ArtScrolls translation. I'm just pointing out there are many ways to do the job of making sense out of it. There's a third way to do it. And by the way, you hear already the Rambam and the Ramchal are telling you how you should think. They're telling you how you should relate to a Kadosh Baruch Hu. With this kind of attitude, you relate to him in a way that's utterly different from what it might have been. There's another way to explain the Shema. I believe this is my own contribution, because one of the things I did was philosophy of language, to a certain extent, and logic. This comes from my particular training. I'll give you an example, and then I'll draw the moral from it. Let's say you're inviting people to join a club to study literature. And you're looking for a particular author to be the symbol of your club. You're going to call it the so-and-so club. And somebody says, what about Charles Dickens? Charles Dickens. You know, his books came out in magazines, a chapter per month or a chapter per quarter, and then they put the other. It was popular entertainment, you know. Okay, he was a good craftsman and he had some interesting ideas, but Charles Dickens? There are many Charles Dickenses. I suggest Mark Twain, because I'm an American, not a Brit. I suggest Mark Twain. There's only one Mark Twain. He could talk like that. What is being meant here? There are many Charles Dickenses, but there's only one Mark Twain. What's that supposed to mean? What it's supposed to mean is there are many authors who have qualities comparable to those of Charles Dickens, but there's no author other than Mark Twain who has qualities comparable to him. So I'm not talking about the people, I'm talking about their qualities. I don't know if you remember, you're probably not young enough, not old enough to remember, but there was a Jewish swimmer, Olympic swimmer, who won 5 gold medals in one Olympics, named Mark Spitz. And some people said, there'll never be another Mark Spitz. Did they mean no Spitz family will name their son Mark? No, they didn't mean that. What they meant was there'll never be another athlete like him. So sometimes when you use a name, you're not talking about the person, you're talking about the person's qualities. So when you say he's one, you mean his qualities are unique, others aren't going to have those qualities. Now it's what the ArtScroll said. He's the one and only. Let's see. What qualities might those be? So there are 2 basic qualities that are associated of a Kodesh Baruch Hu, which are associated with the name Yud Nahei Vav Nahei. First of all, the Ramban says the name, with its spelling, indicates absolute existence, because hoveh in Hebrew is the verb to exist. And the name is built out of those letters. So it's absolute existence, and conceivably there could be many things with absolute existence. In certain areas of philosophy, they do entertain that idea. Maybe they think numbers have absolute existence, or qualities have absolute existence. So the fact that something has absolute existence doesn't mean it's the only one, but it is. That's what Echad says. Absolute existence is only one. And the moral quality associated with that name is mercy. Mercy, Rachamim. So it comes out like this. If he's the only one with absolute existence, how did I get here? Must be that he made me. Or he made other things that made me, because it's got to trace back to him. Otherwise, nothing else has its own existence. So he's the creator, and he creates out of mercy. And that's his uniqueness. There's no merciful creator other than he. Those qualities aren't possessed by any other being. I think that's also a genuine way to read it, a way to give an explanation to what the ArtScroll translated. And now, the implied relationship is enormous. When you take a look at your life, if you're like most people, there are some things in your life which you enjoy, which you prize, which you feel are important and valuable, and other things which are challenging, and there are things which you hope to develop into. But when you say the Shema twice a day, morning and evening, you might think back on the previous 12 hours and think, what wonderful things am I enjoying because the Kodesh Baruch Hu gives them to me. I have a friend who went through a very stressful period in his life. Chaim wrote about this, others, and he said one of the things that kept him sane was every day he made an entry into a notebook. What things do I have to give thanks for? What things must I be grateful for that I had today? It kept him from becoming depressed. It kept him from becoming morose when he realized all the things that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was giving him, even though he was in a very stressful period. So, if you think of that and you know that there's a creator who's merciful, when you have something that you enjoy, something that inspires you, something that lifts you up, trace it back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and recognize that it comes from there. So when you say the Shema, it is permissible to dwell on the Shema a little bit, let's say 5 seconds. That's permissible, not breaking any laws. And you think, wow, the last 12 hours, all these things happened to me, and they came to me from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's how you integrate the philosophical principle of oneness into your own living, something which you could. And by the way, this is a general procedure. If you want to make a text meaningful, put yourself into the text. Project yourself into the text. Sometimes it's obvious when in the Shema Esrei you ask for health and healing, like the article says. You think about people who are sick, and you pray for them. That means it's your relationships with the people who are sick, which you are expressing at this moment. Well, that makes those words very meaningful. When you get distracted during the Shema Esrei, typically you don't get distracted on that blessing, because you care about these people. That's an easy instance of a general idea of putting yourself into the text. I'm suggesting how you can put yourself into the text of the Shema in a very direct way. Just think of the things that you have, that you do, and that you're grateful for. And when you say the Shema, associate them with the Kodesh Baruch Hu. And if you do it the way I'm suggesting, then you have an answer to another question which will come up. What's the very next word after Hashem is one? You should love him. And you could ask, so he's one, so I should love him. Because he's one, I should love him? There are lots of things that are one. Each thing is one, isn't it? Should I love each thing because it's one? What are we being told? Where does the love come out of the one? This is one way to explain it. If the oneness means he's the only merciful creator, and you think of what he's doing for you, then that could lead to love. It's not the only way to get the next word, love, to work. There are other ways, and we'll talk about them. But this is another way to understand the oneness of the Kodesh Baruch Hu. So we have three ways. We have the philosophical way, the Kabbalistic way, and the personal way. And each of them makes a contribution to how you look at the world, how you relate to a Kodesh Baruch Hu. This is what's typical of of this kind of study. Questions up to here? Yeah.
Elokeinu, what does that invoke?
Okay, so now, and that's the next thing I wanted to come to. In fact, when I asked this question, how does oneness lead to love, one person suggested to me, maybe it doesn't come from the oneness. Maybe it comes from the Elokeinu, that he's our God. That's a relationship that he has with us. And that relationship could be the source of why you should love him. Who says it's based on the last word? You made a whole statement, and now you should love goes back to one element in the statement, that he's our God. Now, I thought that was a nice contribution, a brilliant contribution. It sort of does an end run on my question, what's the one that's got to do with it? Answer, nothing. No, it's the Elokeinu that does it. Elohim, the names of Hashem are very rich, and the meanings are deep and varied. But I think that here, at least on the surface, one way to explain what our God is doing here is that the proper name, which was in English is Hashem, the Yud and the Hey, the Vav and the Hey, given that it is a title for the creator of the universe, the merciful creator of the universe, it doesn't express any relationship with us at all. And the Shema is not just a piece of philosophy. The Shema is supposed to be something which is addressed to Israel, as we answered at the beginning. Hear, O Israel. We're not speaking to other nations. We're not speaking to non-Jews. So to abstract entirely from any relationship with the Jewish people would be very odd. If you didn't have it there, hear, O Israel, Hashem is one. Like, how would you understand the connection between hear, O Israel, Hashem is one? But he's saying that he's our God. That means there's a message here specifically for the Jewish people in the relationship that he has with us. So that's one thing that it's doing. The other thing that is typically associated, though it's a little bit subtle, is the fact that he's running the world. He's running the world. So when our history develops, when things happen to us, to understand that he is our God and he's running the world. Now here, there's an opportunity to make a terrible mistake, which I've seen in academia and other places. Well, this is what the Jewish God says about things. But then there's the Christian God, and the Muslim God, and then there are the animist gods, and so on and so on. And each one has its own character, and its own message, and its own way of dealing with the world, as if to say the Jewish God means the God of the Jewish people and Jewish belief, end of story. And then there are others. Of course, from our point of view, that's dead wrong. God is the creator of the whole universe. God is the God of the Chinese also. They just don't happen to know that. It's true. And so on for everything and everyone. So we have to understand that there's a creator who took a special interest in us in addition to his interests in everything else. So it shouldn't be read exclusively as if he's only our God. And indeed, in the Haggadah, at a certain point, you quote a verse from the book of Joshua, and it says that God took Abraham from across the river, and he had children, and he gave to Esau Edom, and Jacob and his children went down to Egypt. And a simplistic person would say, what do I need to know about Esau for? Who cares about him? And the answer, one of the many dimensions of the answer, is that God is a God of the universe. He's running everything. So his activity isn't limited to Jewish history. And in the same breath of telling us that we went down to Egypt because specifically he wanted us to be there, it tells us what he gave to Esau. And that's perfectly natural from our point of view. So we have to be very careful with our guys, that the creator of the universe set up a special relationship with us. Now, when you read the book of Genesis, as you're in the middle of the book of Genesis, it's absolutely obvious, but we're talking now about a verse in the book of Deuteronomy. That's what it's referring to. Okay? Okay, now, given all of that, one way to deal with the first word here is to suggest a different translation. The verb Shema in Hebrew means to hear, and it also means to understand. There are places in the Torah where the word Shema is used to mean to understand. Here are two of them. Joseph is the viceroy in Egypt, and the brothers come down to get food for their families, and they don't recognize him. He recognizes them, but they don't recognize him. And Joseph accuses them of being spies and criminals, and at a certain point, one of the brothers says to the other brother, in presence of Joseph, we're guilty what we did to our brother Joseph. That's why this terrible trouble is coming upon us. And the text says that they spoke out loud because they were speaking Hebrew, and Joseph was using an interpreter to communicate with them, as if he doesn't know Hebrew, because he doesn't want to be identified by them. So they think that Joseph only understands Egyptian, and that's why they speak freely in Hebrew. V'lo yadu ki shomea Yosef. They didn't know that Yosef understood. Shomea there means only understood. They knew they were making noise, and that his eardrum was working perfectly, and he heard the sounds. They shouldn't know he understands. Similarly, in Deuteronomy 28, where there are the curses to the Jewish people, it says you'll be conquered by a nation, Goy asher lo tishma l'shono, a nation whose language you will not shma. That doesn't mean they will communicate by telepathy or by smoke signals. It means you'll hear them jabbering, but you won't understand them. So the word Shema in biblical Hebrew can mean strictly to understand. And now, maybe one way to explain this verse is understand Israel. Understand that Hashem is one. After all, you heard the philosophical interpretation. You heard the Kabbalistic interpretation. I just skimmed off the top. If you go into them deeply, you have to work to understand all of that. This is something which requires more than just hearing and accepting and assimilating. It requires the effort to understand it. So Shema would be very good, as opposed to, let's say, lahazin, which would just mean listen. Not being asked to listen, you're being asked to understand. One more thing, which is in a different direction altogether. I think it's quite hard, but Rashi says it. And this explains why the Hashem is doubled. He says, Hashem is one means to describe the future. When the whole world will know about Hashem and accept Hashem, then he will be one. And he quotes a famous verse, which we say in the prayers over and over again. In that day, Hashem echad, he will be one. Says Rashi, well, that indicates that he isn't now. I said, what do you mean? He isn't now. I mean, say polytheism is right? No. The whole verse is only talking about recognition. It's not talking about what God is. It's talking about his being recognized in the world. According to Rashi, that's the subject of the verse. And of course, right now, he isn't recognized. So the verse here is talking about that he will be recognized in the future. So, first of all, when you read it off the top, it doesn't seem like that. But Rashi has that verse which says Hashem will be one in the future, and those words are meant in terms of recognition. So Rashi is dealing with it as a text which is relevant to other texts. But this then creates another reaction in a Jew. There's a terrible lack in our world. Something's broken in our world. That the world doesn't recognize the Creator. And it's something that we have to feel identified with. It's something in our world. You can't just say, well, but I'm in yeshiva, everything's fine. No, you have a responsibility for the world as well. Your Shema talks about the fact that our world is broken and only will be successful in the future when everybody recognizes it. Like the verse in Isaiah that says we have to be an Or Lagoyim, a light unto the nations. This is a similar idea. So this now puts a responsibility on us to think about the status of Hashem's name in the world as a whole, and to understand that we have a responsibility to push towards that time when the oneness that's associated with the future will actually come. So I hope this gives you an idea, a little bit. I'm just scratching the surface. This is what Jewish learning is like. You had a question? Someone had a question?
Yeah. I always assumed that verse was referring to everybody else in the world, not the Jews.
According to Rashi, that's quite correct.
So, but here we say, "Hear, O Yisrael," not "Hear, O everybody."
No, that's fine. A Jew has to be aware of the fact that the world hasn't got it yet. Listen, pay attention, think about the world. Don't distract yourself from the world. I didn't explain O Israel yet. A couple of other things I want to explain. We'll do that tomorrow in the session. Oh no, tomorrow's Q&A. That's the Monday night regular. So we'll pick this up on Tuesday.